Conversation with the Candidate continues right now.
Welcome back to Conversation with the Candidate with Congressman Chris Pappas seeking his fourth term. He now is going to face questions from our town hall audience of New Hampshire voters. I might jump in with a follow-up or some viewer questions here and there, but we want to get right into things and start with Joan Wentworth.
Good morning.
Good morning.
In New Hampshire and across much of the country, the lack of affordable housing and often available housing of any kind is a serious issue. It also seems to take forever to get any new projects approved, built, and ready for occupancy. What proposals do you have that could help in providing timely solutions to this problem? And what will you do to gain support for them in a highly divided Congress?
Yeah. Thanks so much for that question. That's a central question that we've got to answer for New Hampshire to be able to succeed long term and to provide our families and individuals with the support they need to get in a home or get in an apartment that they can afford. I was up in the Mount Washington Valley not too long ago, met with a woman, her name was Erin, at a new affordable housing development that was built with federal support. And she was thrilled to be living at long last near her family members in the Mount Washington Valley. And we need to be giving more people a chance like that, to choose the community they want to choose, to live near where they work, and to find an affordable place. Unfortunately, over the last several years, we have seen an escalation in housing costs in New Hampshire. The median home price has jumped to over $500,000. We've got a vacancy rate that's under 0.5%. I was talking to a developer the other day in Manchester who said he's got 2,000 apartments, only 3 of them are open right now, and that's because they're being cleaned for the next people to move in. So there is not a lot of stock, and this is an issue where we have to address the supply and focus on what we can do to put more federal tools on the table that's going to allow for more building. So there are some programs that are oversubscribed right now that are federal programs that are often the difference maker for these projects to be brought forward. A lot of the construction we see happening in Manchester are done with programs like community development block grant funding, the low-income housing tax credit, which is an incentive for our developers to build more truly affordable housing, workforce housing. And so we're fighting to expand those programs. In addition to that, we've got to be working with our communities to make sure that they can be innovative and creative about how they approach housing. I was in Dover not too long ago, and they've got a tiny home development that they recently opened up. And so you have young families moving in, people that are taking jobs as teachers and firefighters in the community that can now find a place that they can afford right in the community where they're working. So this is a family issue, it's an economic issue, and we really need a partnership at all levels of government to make this successful. And so I see the federal role here as providing the tools and resources, helping our communities understand what existing regulations they have, how they can modernize those and learn from others that are doing really innovative things to help us address the supply challenge. And so I think that's where we've got to go in the next few years, because New Hampshire Housing tells us we're 60,000 units short by the end of the next decade. So that's a huge amount of housing that we've got to be building, and we've got to do it in a way that is truly making available workforce housing for people who are struggling to afford it.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Joan. Next question comes from Kevin Donahue.
Good morning, Congressman
Good morning.
Pappas. How are you?
Good.
What are your beliefs in global warming, and what can you do to address the causes and help protect the New Hampshire ski industry and winter sports tourism?
Well, thanks, and I'm glad that you made the connection with what we have going on here in New Hampshire and our way of life in the Granite State. Because oftentimes if I'm encountering folks who might not understand the science or believe the science, you should send them to talk to one of our ski area operators or someone who is in the maple business, because they can tell you how their business has changed and how that hurts our economy over the long term in terms of a changing climate. We've seen over the last decade about $500 million worth of climate-related cleanup in New Hampshire from disasters that we've seen, including flooding along our coastline. Just this past January, we've had 2 major storms that have caused a lot of damage for towns up and down the coast. And so we've been working to provide grants to our communities through the bipartisan infrastructure law to ensure that our communities can rebuild in a more resilient way, upgrading culverts and roads that continually get washed out to help us deal with a changing climate. But we shouldn't feel like we're powerless to address this and help change what the future looks like in terms of a state that is going to be habitable, a planet that will be livable for future generations. And so I think that starts by making sure we're reducing emissions and being more responsible about how we develop energy sources. We need an all of the above approach, but we need to make sure we're diversifying our energy portfolio. That's why I supported the Inflation Reduction Act, which is estimated to lower emissions by 30% by the end of the decade by investing in solar and offshore wind and other renewable projects at scale. We need to do more work to upgrade our grid and our workforce to fully take advantage of the economic opportunities that are contained in that bill. And I do think that we can do this in a way that also lowers energy costs for Granite State families and businesses. That particular bill provides tax credits for homeowners and businesses to weatherize, to become more energy efficient, and to ensure that their bills ultimately are less in a part of the country where we have the highest energy costs in the nation. So I think we have to look at this from both a cost perspective, an economic perspective, but not lose sight over the damage that climate change will continue to do to New Hampshire and our way of life. And this should cause us all to come together as Republicans and Democrats and figure out what we can do to solve it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the question.
Marie Mulroy has our next question.
Yes, Congressman. I just want to know, because it's growing almost exponentially, is why does it cost so much money to get elected these days?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question, and it's escalated a great deal in the wake of the Citizens United decision, and so over the last 10, 15 years, we've seen an explosion in the super PACs and outside interests that are often flooding the airwaves. No offense to WMUR, with information, and it takes it out of the context of this being a conversation between candidates and elected officials and the voters, and that's the connection to me that is most important. That's why in our campaign we don't accept any corporate PAC money, because we believe this should be about individuals and not about the special interests that have far too much power in Washington. I'm carrying legislation that I've introduced in the House that requires disclosure for money that is being given to these super PACs. Oftentimes it's unaccounted for, and so someone can write a huge check to a super PAC and you don't know where that funding is coming from. We should at least know and try to end the influence that foreign money has even been proven to have in our elections. So I think we've got to get to a place where our democracy is about the relationship between our elected officials and the people that they serve. I take that seriously, and I think as we kind of consider threats to our democracy, we've got to ensure that people trust our institutions and that they can deliver results for people. And so issues that we've taken on, including lowering the cost of prescription drugs, that's about taking on entrenched, powerful interests in Washington that have a lot of money behind them to try to do something positive in terms of lowering costs for Granite State seniors and families. So I think it's about priorities, whether or not you're gonna put New Hampshire first, and whether you'll address the issue of dark money in our elections. I would hope we could overturn the Citizens United decision through a constitutional amendment. That's a heavy lift, but if we can't do that, let's at least make some incremental changes to try to make sure that the voters ultimately are in the driver's seat.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Congressman, you mentioned delivering results, and some voters are still focused on those deliverables. We have a viewer question coming in from Gordon Hayner, who asks, what is your most notable, in your opinion, win for Granite Staters as their congressman?
Well, there are a number of things we've gotten across the finish line. I think about 2 years ago, in a number of signature bipartisan bills, from the infrastructure law to the CHIPS and Science Act that's revitalizing U.S. manufacturing. I do think one of the most important promises we can make is to our veterans. And so we were able to pass a bill called the PACT Act, which is providing 3.5 million American veterans with care and benefits who have been exposed to toxic substances. It used to be that these veterans, including our Vietnam era veterans who were exposed to Agent Orange, would have to prove, with their lawyers and veteran service organizations that they got sick as a result of their service. Now this makes the presumption that they were exposed to these toxic chemicals. They'll get the help that they need, and so it takes the burden off their shoulders. And so it's going to take some time to continue to implement it. We've already seen 1 million American veterans file claims through the PACT Act, thousands right here in the Granite State. And it's also allowed more veterans to get connected to care and other resources at VA, which is a positive thing. So I do think that's a game changer for our veteran community, and something that I'm proud to have worked across the aisle to get done.
Next question comes from Carolyn Morrill.
Hi, Carolyn.
Hi there. As we know, Congress makes all the laws. So what, if you were able to sponsor your bill, what would be the top priority bill that you would like to get through?
Yeah. Well, there are a number of things that we need to consider. I think right now the focus should be on how we lower costs and make life more affordable for New Hampshire families. I'm sponsoring legislation that is looking to cut taxes for working families and expand something called the child tax credit. We had an expanded credit during the pandemic years, and it cut child poverty in half in this country and allowed families to deal with increased costs and to give their kids an early start, a good start at a young age. And so that would be legislation that I would put at the top of my list of something that I hope we could accomplish. There are a number of other things out there too, and we mentioned housing earlier, prescription drugs and health care. Child care is another issue where it's just unavailable and unaffordable to most folks in New Hampshire, an issue we have to work on. And I will also add to the mix just the need to defend reproductive freedom and ensure that government isn't meddling in people's private personal decisions, especially when it comes to their health care. And I think the federal government can do more to try to push extremism to the side and focus on solutions. At the end of the day, this should be about how we can come together as Americans and unite behind an agenda that is going to move our country forward. I think too often politics becomes a zero-sum game, and it's about winning and beating the other side. That's not what this should be about. It should be about getting things done, and that's the team that I'm proud to be associated with and want to continue to work with folks in both parties to try to achieve results first.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Francis Donahue has our next question.
Hi.
Good morning, Congressman
Good morning.
Pappas. So presently, the maximum earnings tax for Social Security is $168,600. Do you think they will raise the maximum earnings to keep Social Security solvent?
Well, we need to focus on how we shore up Social Security. Right now, it's estimated, I believe, in 2037, Social Security won't be able to pay out benefits at current levels, and everyone will see a reduction. And no one can afford for that to happen, especially people who have been paying into this program throughout their working years and need to know that they can count on that for a secure retirement. And so in past years, we have brought together Republicans and Democrats on a commission to put forward good ideas about how to shore up Social Security. And so I support creating something like that. But I don't support, gutting the program, privatizing it, as some have suggested, which I think would be dangerous in the long term for our workers and retirees. In terms of the tax picture, I think we should consider how those at the upper end of the income spectrum, earning more than $1 million, pay more and pay their fair share into the system. Right now, we have a situation where, say, someone earning $1 million pays on a fraction of their income, but someone who's working hard each and every day, a middle-class family, is paying Social Security tax on 100% of their income. And so I think there's a fairness that we can get at there with high-income earners that will allow us to shore up the system, ensure that we can pay benefits to seniors, and return their investment that they've been paying in throughout their working years. And this is a foundational program that's part of the American bargain. And so I will always stand up to protect Social Security and make sure that we have fair policies that will allow the program to continue.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Catherine Corkery has our next question.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Great to see you. I have a question about the PFAS class of chemicals. Communities across the districts have experienced water and air pollution from the forever chemicals. And it's coming from all the sources, from leaking landfills, firefighting foam, and manufacturing factories. How have you been supporting these communities in addressing the health and economic impacts, and what are the next steps?
Well, thank you for that question. I hear this a lot from folks across the state, and I've been educated by people in communities from Merrimack to the Seacoast about the issue of PFAS as it's been identified in communities around the site of the St. Gobain factory in Merrimack, in the towns that are downwind from the smokestacks there, but also around Pease in the Portsmouth area. And we have hundreds of military bases across the country where the situation is similar. They used PFAS-laden firefighting foam on the runways. It's gotten into the groundwater. And now that contamination persists because these are forever chemicals. They also accumulate in the human body, and they are directly linked to chronic conditions, including cancer and thyroid disease. So we've got to come at this from a perspective of holding the polluters accountable, cleaning up the contamination, giving people the information and support that they need in their day-to-day lives to stay healthy, and also making sure that everyone has access to clean drinking water. In Merrimack and surrounding towns like Bedford, Litchfield, Londonderry, this is a serious issue. We've had folks that have been on bottled water for years and years now without a connection to safe, clean drinking water. And so as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, we passed billions of dollars worth of help to states and communities to be able to upgrade drinking water and make sure that it's being filtered and delivered in a way that people can count on it. We also have been pushing EPA to develop national standards. We've developed standards in New Hampshire, but we should have standards across the country with respect to the safety of our drinking water, the cleanliness of our air, and keeping PFAS from contaminating it. And so that's something that we've supported, have also written legislation around the discharge of PFAS chemicals into our waterways. Right now, there are no regulations on that across the country, and so PFAS should be regulated under the Clean Water Act, just like any other hazardous substance is. So this is both about giving people information and help today, getting our communities the support to get clean drinking water, and going after the polluters, ultimately, to make sure that they're responsible for the kind of infrastructure upgrades that our communities need.
Congressman, another viewer question coming
Okay.
in. What would you do to support lower grocery and heating costs?
Yeah, this is a question that I get all the time, and I think, as I mentioned, New Hampshire has among the highest energy rates in the country. Right now, we're producing more oil and gas than at any point in our nation's history. We've got to be making sure that American consumers and households are able to benefit from that. Right now, big oil is chasing profits around the world. And I've been supporting legislation that looks to create greater price transparency and accountability for potential price gouging by oil and gas companies to make sure ultimately that they're held accountable by American consumers and hopefully that we can achieve lower prices. With respect to grocery prices, I think the same situation persists where we do have increasingly a lot of large companies that are controlling the supply. We've got to make sure that there's oversight and an ability to hold them accountable to consumers if they're price gouging or manipulating prices. But we do need to make sure that we're putting more money back in the pockets of families. And so that's why efforts to lower taxes, including by expanding the child tax credit, I think are really important right now to ensure that our families can make it and deal with the high costs that they're seeing.
Another viewer question for you, this one from Brian St. Ange. He asks, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Why?
Well, I think about 4 years ago, it was 2020. We were in the throes of the COVID pandemic. We lost 1 million Americans to that tragedy. We all know someone, have someone close to us that was lost to COVID, and the disruption to our day-to-day lives, including to our economy, were just unimaginable. So we are still dealing with the after effects of that. We're dealing with learning loss in our education system. We're still dealing with the need to support our small businesses that are, continuing to get back to normal, to our supply chains that were disrupted, and we've been supporting our shipping and ports and other infrastructure upgrades we need to support to get back to where we need to be. So I do think that we've made a lot of progress over the last 4 years. And I think there's more work to do. And I think as Americans, we need to figure out how we can come together and solve problems. At the end of the day, this should be about hearing from people's own experiences and figuring out how we can turn that into good policy in Washington and in Concord and be working in a bipartisan way. I've been rated as one of the most bipartisan members of the House, number 3 out of 435, number 1 among members on my side of the aisle, because I know the solutions are found somewhere in the middle. And that's how I think we're going to continue to make life better, life more affordable, and ensure that our state continues to be strong and prepared for the future.
Quick lightning question for you here, about 30 seconds to answer. Does FEMA need more manpower and funding right now?
Well, I think they do need more support, and we're going to continue to learn more about this latest devastating hurricane in Florida, Hurricane Milton, on top of what we saw with Helene. We did give them authority to spend down their budget at the end of September. So we'll be looking for more information from them on that. But we also want to make sure SBA and other federal agencies that provide direct support to our Main Street economies that have been disrupted by these storms have the support they need. And so there's some question about whether disaster loan programs through the SBA might need some additional appropriations, and we'll be watching that space.
Congressman, thanks for joining us on Conversation with the Candidate. Thank you to our audience. Thank you for watching. We've got Russell Prescott coming up in 2 weeks as Republican opponent. Join us then. You can catch any of this on WMUR.com. Have a good morning.